Well, welcome back to another episode of the Hector Mike Experience, Common Sense in an Uncommon World. And Mike, this has been a kind of a busy week here. We've got a governor that went MIA in California. We've got a big week for Biden Harris
Yeah,
administration with the
yeah.
infrastructure. And as we talked about last time or a couple episode or two ago, and I'd like kind of expand on it is you've got this payment that would go to undocs who were separated at the border, and I know there's additional controversy that has come from that situation. So let's get started with Gavin Newsom. So it looked
Well,
like he was ready to go over to Scotland to go and talk climate change. Had his speeches ready, gets his booster shot, goes MIA for about 10 days, finally comes out, and says, hey, there was nothing to see here. I had no negative reaction to the booster shot. But what I did have is I had, my kids who kind of he didn't say they had an intervention, but the newspapers wrote it was type somewhat like an intervention where his children said, Dad, we'd like you to go trick or treating with us. We'd like you to spend more time with us. And so that was the reason he gave as to why he went missing all those days.
that's trick or treat. I mean, you can understand it. You get some good Reese's bars or Milky Ways or Snickers. I'd want to skip. I'd want to skip a climate change conference as well for those who wouldn't. The problem that with all of this is pretty simple, actually, and it's not just a political thing. It's a good lesson in public relations. What he said, which was his kids kind of did this intervention, and wanted him to spend more time with them, is absolutely a noble thing, and it's a wonderful thing a father would do. The problem is, do you believe him? If you don't have credibility, then no matter what you come up with, people aren't going to believe it, except your most hardcore people. And when I saw him say that, my immediate reaction was, well, I guess the Republicans have Ted Cruz, and now the Democrats have Gavin Newsom. Because, Ted Cruz, in the middle of an ice storm in Texas, decided to skip off to Cancun when, the houses were cold and there was no heat. And, because his kids wanted to go to Cancun. And, apparently, for Gavin, it's kind of the same thing. His kids wanted him to go trick or treating. So, a thing that he is a starship or a major piece of him and his policies, which is climate change. He decides to not go. And again, it may be true, but with all of the other things that he has said, including some of the things that his kids were involved with, and including things like the summer camp, where he said that they didn't know he sent them to a summer camp that didn't require masks. There was another one, I forget exactly the details of it, but he was talking about how schools and the problems
Or
and
he was talking about how he understood the difficulty parents were sharing because of distance learning, but yet his kids were going to in-person learning,
right,
only
in
to find
public
out
school,
later from a couple of reporters.
right.
But I think what along these lines is I'd like to believe him, and I'd like to think it's difficult. I'm a single dad, and I've got two girls, and taking them, obviously cooking for them, taking them to school, picking them up, putting them to their sports, their schoolwork, and so forth, and at the same time, having doing our job to help pay the bills. Um, it gets a little bit difficult with time, and time is one of my most precious commodities. And while you'd like to believe that, I think the thing is he should have said it from the get-go. He should have said it from the beginning and not allow the 10, 12 days to pass by where all these other theories and everything else came about, because then he has lost credibility since he was elected into office and prior to that. And so this is kind of compounds onto it, and it's like, okay, so you had an entire speech ready to go. You were ready. Your trip was ready to go over to Scotland to talk about his
Right.
favorite subject, which is climate change. And then you just ghost the state of California. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not as though he's, some low level elected official. He's the governor of California. You're
Right.
going to have every single reporter asking questions. You're going to have everyone else asking the questions, especially for someone who enjoys being in the limelight so much.
Well, it goes to the name of the show, Common Sense in an Uncommon World. Common sense says if you're going to do that and you're in a position that he's in, you say from the beginning, you know what, I'm not going to go to the climate change thing. I'm going to send someone else to represent the state of California. After everything that's happened over this past year, I've sat down with my family and believe that it's more important for me to spend time with them right now. And I'll be doing some work for the state, but really I'm going to just take a time out and spend time with my family. If you do that up front, you know what's going to happen? People are going to believe you, as opposed to doing it after the fact. That's the difference. If you do it up front and use common sense and just tell the truth, if that is indeed the truth, then people will believe you and they'll say, "What a good dad." But when you do it after the fact and you have a track record of not saying truthful things as it relates to your kids sometimes, then people will be skeptical, and rightfully so. And so I think he really kind of blew an opportunity to, because you're right, by the way. I mean, he's not the Secretary of State of California or, you know, something like that. He's the governor. I mean, he's the governor of the largest state. He's the governor, who, after winning when Democrats lost so badly in 2021, could be the shining star going forward for the Democrat Party. To ghost the state of California for 10 or 12 days and not say anything is really not acceptable. Again, if you're going to do this with your kids, God bless you. Go do it. But tell people, just, you don't even have to do it yourself. Just issue a statement. I've decided to spend some time with my family. It's been an incredibly busy and tough year. And, right now, as much as climate change is important to me, my family is more important right now. And I'm sending whoever, the lieutenant governor or whoever to Stockholm and cover the climate change conference. That would have made a lot more sense and been a lot more believable. And that's part of the thing here. What he says may be absolutely true, but the believability of it on a scale of 1 to 10 is nowhere near what it would have been if he had just been upfront about it. And there's
Well,
no
and the
reason
thing
not
is,
to be.
right, and the thing is, you allowed for all these other theories, right? And some of them, as we talked about last time, there was discussion as to whether he had a negative reaction to the booster shot.
Right.
Katie Grimes did an interesting piece in the California Globe where she looked at who was going on the trip over to Scotland, and on that climate change trip. And this is in the Globe, and we'll make sure that in the description we put the link to the article. Is she looked at the itinerary and found that the person there's been allegations as to Governor Gavin Newsom having an affair with someone in his office, and she listed there the person that this allegations are made with, that she was on the trip, and whether this was the wife of Gavin saying, "Hey, you can't go on the trip with her," or so forth. And so what you've just done is, for not being upfront, is you're allowing all these different things to pop up, which at the end of the day ruins more of the credibility.
Right.
At the end of the day, becomes a distraction, and a
Mm-hmm.
distraction over some very important things that are happening in California.
Yeah.
As we're all seeing, I was going into the holidays. We're going into Thanksgiving in about a week and a half. I mean, gas prices have now hit a new record high. You've got inflation is hit the highest amount in the highest increase in 3 decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so things are a lot more expensive. Things are more difficult. I was reading an article by, I think it was Cal Matters in the Los Angeles Times this past week, where they talked about, once again, California has the highest poverty rate in the entire nation. When you account for housing expenses and you account for transportation expenses.
Welcome to California. I'd take a time out as well if I was in charge of all of that. I'd want to dress up as maybe the governor of Texas or the governor of Florida, and that's what I would have dressed up for Halloween, because I would have got more treats than tricks. It's the state's in trouble. It was interesting because his coming out party was a speech to an economic summit about how great the state is doing. And, to a certain extent, that's true. But, I remember when I moved out here 20 years ago, the first thing I learned, because, I moved out here from little old Rhode Island, where you could drive north to south in 40 minutes. And if you went to Massachusetts, you had to stay overnight because it was going to another state. Okay. So that's what I grew up with. I come out here and immediately recognized California is not one state. It's like six different states. What you have in the north is a bunch of issues and politics that is completely different in the Northeast than it is in the Northwest. You got the Central Valley, which is its own, state unto itself. You've got LA, you've got San Diego, the Inland Empire. It's like six different states. It really now is becoming two states, the haves and the have-nots. And, those people that are above a certain line and that line keeps rising are doing okay. They can sustain the 450, 475 gas prices. They can sustain the energy prices. They can sustain the inflation. They can sustain, the fact that there's goods and services that are not available anymore. But more and more as that line rises, it captures a whole bunch of more people that work 40, 50 hours a week and drop them below the line. And that's why you now have two Californias. And I think if I were the governor of a state that was in that kind of situation, I'd be a little bit worried because the only thing he has going for him is the more and more that line rises and the more and more people drop below that line, the more trapped they are of not being able to get out of the state. They're certainly not going to get out of the situation in California, but they're more trapped to be able to get out of the state. So he's got a whole bunch of things ahead of him. And again, I would look at it and say, I don't know why he just wasn't upfront. It really does help, not only in politics but in PR, to be upfront about stuff. And that way, you're not having to remember everything you said and come up with some explanation or excuse for it. But to switch gears a little bit, one of the things I truly laughed at this week was, obviously the president signed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. And I was in the car and I heard some congressperson from California talk about how this was going to immediately solve the problems we have at the ports and all of the ships out in the sea and can't get the goods, and this is going to be great for the infrastructure and things are going to be fixed for Christmas. And I'm like, dude, you got to stop going to the 420 joint. I mean, no pun intended. It was like, you're not going to see the benefit, and there will be benefits to this, there's no doubt about it, but you won't see the benefits to this thing for 3-4 years down the road. So this, again, this unrealistic thing of, he signs a bill in a I don't think it was the Rose Garden, I'm not sure where it was, the White House lawn. He signs the bill, and there's this immediate thought of all of this money is going to become available. And you're going to see an immediate change. Again, be realistic in everything. There will be some benefits to it. The $110 billion for roads and bridges, that's going to be helpful. There's no doubt about it. It's going to be helpful for creating jobs. There's no doubt about it. That's why when the president came out with he came out with two women for the announcement, and they came out the door, walked across the lawn to the dais, and there was the president, and I don't remember the name of the woman, but she represented some union, and then there was a person in the middle who I think was the vice president, but I haven't seen her in so long. I wasn't quite sure, but I saw the laugh, and then it hit me. And he understands that that's going to be a huge thing. Now, how we pay for it is something else, but again, it's like just be realistic about expectations on things.
One, and with the infrastructure bill that we've got, what I find it interesting is how it's gonna take a while. It's gonna take a long time. On October, I believe it was October 13th, President Biden indicated that the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach would be going in 24-hour operation. Something we talked about that needed to be done several weeks beforehand, that we talked about in one of our podcasts. So on October 13th, he goes out and says, okay, the ports are going to run 24-hour operations. Well, by November 10th, at that time there was 50 some ships out there. By November 10th, there were like 73 ships out, out there. But just yesterday, and now we're going into what, November 15th, there were 100 ships out there. So it hasn't gotten better. It's got
Right.
actually gotten worse.
Right.
Now you've got articles in the LA Times, looking at it with Earth Justice and a couple other environmental groups that are talking about the haze that is being felt or being seen in that particular region because you've got so many ships out there just idling. And so with so many ships out there, the increased pollution that people are feeling right into that area. And so it's not like Gavin Newsom had to go to or Scotland or send his lieutenant governor to Scotland to talk about climate change. It just fixed the ports. I mean,
Right.
that's right in your home area.
Well,
And so,
and that's the hypocrisy of some of these climate change activists. He'll be part of an effort that is an international in scope to clean the air and clean the water and yada yada yada. But the block and tackling things you can do in your own backyard, literally, aren't done. And what's the result? I mean, not only is it you can't find things on shelves, but and you can't you can't get a car for a decent price. This weekend I was listening to a car show podcast, and they were talking about how they were going to start selling cars with IOUs. Sell the car as is, and then as they get a part in that they've been waiting for, you bring the car back in and they'll put the part in and stuff like that. Hopefully, brakes aren't one of those things. But that's where we are, and there's also the unintended consequences of those issues, which are exactly what you said: pollution in the water, pollution in the air, and it doesn't. These things are massive problems, and it's not overnight solutions the way they're being presented. And so I
what?
think,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, the governor, we talked about a little earlier, when the governor was over at his economic summit, that his where he kind of reappeared again. One of the things that I found striking his economic summit is the governor talked about, well, the people of California are going to be happy when they see us release our new budget because we're going to have a big budget surplus. The thing is, we don't want to wait till the budget gets released in January because remember, it gets released in January, then you've got a May revise, and then you've got another revise that happens right around June time, which is kind of the debate and the meshing together with the Assembly and the Senate, and then finally you get a budget passed the next month and signed into law. Well, the thing is, why do we have to wait 6 months or 7 months in order to start getting some economic relief? And let's say California does have a large budget surplus like it did last year. The thing is that a lot of these programs are geared for more social services as opposed to getting people into jobs. And
Right.
so, okay, we can expand the welfare rolls. I mean, this last year, the state of California provided health insurance to undocumented immigrants. There is a cost that goes with it. If you add 500,000 more people who now have coverage of insurance, the state didn't add doctors to go take care of all these people. And so, whether it's you or me or anyone else who needs to go see a doctor, well, you just added 500,000 more people into this arena without adding the doctors. What do you think the waits are going to be like?
Right.
The quality of care, the availability of maybe getting that procedure done or some other things. And so, this notion of you're going to be happy with what you see in the budget, is it a bigger safety net? And mind you, I know we've talked about this before. I believe in a strong safety net, but like my father used to say, is a strong safety net is fine, but no, we don't want it to turn into a mattress. And it just seems as though the programs that the governor's talking about is looking to turn more of this thing into a mattress and saying, look, now we've got more money they're going to provide for this social service. Forget some of that stuff and start putting this thing in so we can get people into jobs so they can be self-dependent and at the same time, help their own family out.
Well, I think one of the things, I even go a step before that, which is if he stands there and says we've got a huge surplus, and we should, by the way, because the federal government keeps pumping money into the state. I mean, let's not forget that. They keep pumping money over and over into the state, and they keep pumping it in for these one-time programs. And once these programs are done, the question is going to be how do you fund them? And so, it's a cycle of dependency is what it really becomes. It's a cycle of dependency, which honestly, is what some of those legislators in Congress want to do, is create a cycle of dependency on the government, because then you lose your freedom. And I really do think that that's what's going on here. And when I hear we've got a surplus, my immediate reaction is great. I mean, I got to pay $5 a gallon for gasoline. If I'm paying you too much money, how about giving you some of it back? Don't tell me how you're going to spend it. Tell me how you're going to give it back to the people again, so that line between the haves and the have-nots in California can start to come together like this a little bit better. That doesn't happen with government spending or government programs. That comes with giving people more of their money back so they can go into the marketplace and spend the money and invest it, and it brings the line back together. And that's where we're heading in the opposite direction. And honestly, not only does I think the governor and his policy people like that, I think a majority of the people of California like that. They like being cared for. They like being dependent. They like the free shit. I mean, it's amazing to me. They don't. A lot of folks don't realize what they're losing by this. But when you look at the way people vote in this state, it's not like the Republicans aren't putting up a clear difference between what's there. They are, but people still keep going back and voting that way. And I think it's one of the things we got to figure out is, what is it going to take people to understand that while it may be easy to get free stuff, if you can break that cycle of dependency, then you start to see that haves and have-nots in California, the two different Californias, kind of come closer together. That's where we ought to be moving.
Well,
Um,
and maybe we're beginning to see that now. I think starting to see a lot of hurt from folks, or a lot of anger from people from all sides over the gas prices, over
mhm.
the cost of goods. I mean, we began to see that where in San Francisco and some of these other cities that have said, you know what, we're going to do zero bail. Um, if it's a minor issue, let them back out. Well, now that you've had all these break-ins, you've got all these crime rising, you've got homicides rising, you've got local communities that are scared. I mean, you've got local communities in San Francisco that have looked to go and hire private security to just patrol their neighborhood
Right.
because the police aren't doing it, or they've been told by the city leaders that, hey, that isn't a priority. These are low level crimes. Well, you get your place broken into enough times, or you get your car broken into enough times. Any crime like that isn't low level, and it puts fear in people.
Well, and the other problem with what you just mentioned is that, the police want to go do their job, serve and protect for the most part. And, they go arrest someone and then they take it to the DA, and the DA says, nah, it's not worth it. So the police look at it and say, there are other things I can be doing. But again, going back to that line in the fairness that exists, if you're standing in a Walgreens in line, and I don't know about you, but it seems like every time I go into Walgreens, they release 400 people and they're all in line in front of me. I'm standing in line for 10 minutes with my little greeting card and my, whatever I'm buying there, usually Rogaine, to see if I can get this thing to grow. Um, and you're waiting in line and, ready to pay, some not outrageous money, but pay what the price of a product is. And then someone walks in and they start picking this and that and the other thing, and then they walk out the door, and you're standing there saying, I'm waiting in friggin' line here to pay for this thing. This dude just walked in and stole this shit, and he walked out the door, and nothing's going to happen to him. I mean, you stand there and you say, what the hell's going on around here? There's something wrong with this whole equation. And it's not rocket science. It's not, some kind of social experiment. There's just a basic right and wrong that we're missing in this state and on some of this stuff. And that's what I think leads to the frustration that you're talking about that people have, is they see that kind of thing. They see that there's not a fairness in things. And I think that's one of the things, honestly, if you look back, that I think we made a mistake with on the recall, is it wasn't just the policies, it was the implementation and fairness of those policies. There were certain groups of people that could get away with stuff. Everything from being able to go to the French Laundry to be able to actually have a funeral for someone that died because they were some kind of big shot or heavy hitter or something else. And, all other people who were not able to experience all of those normal things of life, because of the COVID, but other people could. That dichotomy of what's fair for everybody. And I think the crime thing is one of them that's extreme because people look and they say, I'm following the rules, the most basic rules there are. Forget taxes, forget, am I writing this off or anything? The most basic rules there are. I'm going in a store, I need something. It's going to cost me $3.87. It really should only cost me $1.50, but I'm going to pay the $3.87 because I need it. I'm going to stand in line for 15 minutes, and while I'm standing in line, I'm going to watch some jabroni come walking in and take a bunch of shit off the shelves and walk out the door, and everybody's going to watch him and not do a damn thing. You know what? Just talking about it gets me pissed off. So,
One,
imagine people standing there.
one the thing is, next time you go to the store, it's not 187 anymore. It's 190 because, I mean, to get the double whammy is the person steals it, but then you have to pay because,
Right.
look, at the end of the day, the store has a loss. They're going to recuperate the loss or try to
Right.
recuperate the loss by increasing prices, and
Yeah.
so you get hit twice by all these incidents.
Right.
Which, as we go into kind of moving into the topic, but on this idea of pain, we put out there and we looked at it, and just to put clarification, so there, because we had a couple comments as to whether or not we were right on our numbers, whether or not the federal government was looking to provide, some sort of payment
Mm-hmm.
over to undocumented who were separated at the
Right.
border. And so there was confusion there, and this is kind of how the story goes. Initially, the Wall Street Journal ended up reporting that the Biden administration was looking to find a way to provide financial money to those that were separated at the border. Joe Biden gets interviewed about that, and he says that's garbage. That's garbage. So everyone assumes, okay, well, I guess it's not going to happen. Then the White House retracts, and Biden says, well, what I was talking about being garbage was the amount that we were going to give. And so now the number has come down to about $450,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the number sits right now. And that's where the administration has admitted that it is looking to figure out a way to provide some sort of compensation to families who were separated at the border.
Somewhat.
Some money.
No, no, no.
Compensation. Yeah. Some money. Yeah, some money. And so the
Some
thing is,
could call it reparation.
well, it would be $450,000 per person.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have a family of four that could potentially get about $1 million.
Right.
And so, as I've been talking to friends, and I know as you have too, it came out to this notion of, and look, while I may not be in agreement with the reparations or what California is doing with this committee on reparations, I think the question in talking to some of my friends is like, how is it that the federal government was able to find money to provide to people who came here to this country illegally, who put their families out in danger of being separated, but yet throughout this entire time hasn't been able to find any money to provide for African Americans who were brought here against their will, enslaved, or those individuals who were separated from their families, from their homes, like our Japanese Americans during World War II and placed in internment camps.
Right. You're absolutely right, and I want to talk about that. But first, I've got to ask you: is that thing on your shirt something that you're trying to get a $450,000 for? Is that a lost child that you have? That's a great looking shirt you got there. Tell me about that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll make sure I put this in for the pod for those watching or listening on the podcast. I'll put a link over to the shirt. No, we get certain people who call us or DM us and said, hey, I've got this shirt. Would you mind wearing it as you're doing your podcast and so forth? And so I'll back up a little bit. It's an astronaut with a boombox, and so as you can see, the boombox down here, and so yeah, that's kind of a cool shirt,
That is a
full
cool
of color,
shirt.
and I'm like,
I'll
yeah,
give
sure,
you
why not?
I'll give you 450,000 for it. It is a cool shirt. I'm wondering why he sent it to you and not to me because they don't make astronauts that big. I think.
No, it was a cool shirt, and so I'm like, all right, we'll end up
Well,
wearing it and so forth. So yeah,
let's get back to your point because it's absolutely right. Again, I'm going to go back to the theme of our show, which is common sense. They ACLU sued the federal government. They wanted over $1 million a person. The federal government's counter is the 450,000. Biden said, well, that's and you listen to what's her name, the Jen Psaki, the press secretary says, go ask the Justice Department about that because they're the ones that are pursuing this. They're the ones negotiating with the ACLU. The proposal is to give, as you mentioned, every single person undocumented, illegal that came over and was separated from their kid, $450,000 per person. And we mentioned this on one of our podcasts recently, and this is where the common sense in an uncommon world takes place. If you're a family member of a military man or woman that was killed in the line of service, that's $100,000 you get from the government. That's it. If you happened to have, when you joined the service, paid a life insurance policy over the course of time that you were in service, but you paid for that life insurance policy, then you can get up to $400,000. So right off the bat, we're paying illegal immigrants more than we are the families who lost men and women in battle for this country. And that is unconscionable. Just absolutely unconscionable. There is something fundamentally wrong with this government and this country if that is the way we have become as the United States of America. Now, to your other point about reparations. First of all, I'm against reparations because, everybody wants to go back in history and back in history and back in history. I look at it and say, is there anything that I could have done? Well, not only me, but, when all of that was taking place, my family's out in Italy picking olives in some vineyard someplace. The reality is exactly what you said. How is it that all of a sudden there's $450,000 per person for people who voluntarily and willingly and against all advice, to quote the Vice President of the United States, do not come, do not come. They still came. And that's what happens when you come. They got separated from their families. Not a great thing, but you know what? That's something they decided to do. They knowingly did it. And yet they get 450,000, and you have people who were over at home, and then the ship showed up, and then, it wasn't the cruise line saying, hey, come on board, we got a great cruise for you. They were kidnapped, taken across the seas, and enslaved, and yet somehow the government can't find money there. And you mentioned the Asian American community. I remember when I moved out here and people was explaining to me, because where I live, I'm near Santa Anita Racetrack, that it used to be an internment camp for Asian Americans during World War II. And I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, it was that kind of fear that existed that separated families and put people in these places. Maybe you've gotten an apology from the government, but that's it. There's something fundamentally wrong with all of this equation that makes no sense at all. When you're able to find the government is going out of its way to give money to illegals who came here willingly and give them more money than they're giving to the families of men and women of the United States military that have passed in service, giving more money to people than to people whose family was taken away from their home country and brought here and enslaved, giving money to people who were Americans that were here, but because of a war became, imprisoned. It's just insane to me. I got to tell you, it's just insane to me that we as a country would allow this to happen, that we would allow our government to do this. I think if they do that and people approve of it and people allow the government to do that and people don't revolt over it, I think it's really a sad day in the United States of America.
Well, you've got all these contradictions. I mean, you've got that contradiction there that you just, um, laid out nicely. I think as we get closer to the time when the Justice Department, now mind you, they say the Justice Department. Well, guess who's in charge of the Justice Department? This is the
Right.
Biden administration. They put those people into those positions to go and negotiate and say, okay, you're now part of the Justice Department. I mean, he gets to appoint all these individuals, so it really is the Biden administration.
Oh, sure.
It's not some bureaucratic independent group out there. It's the Biden administration. Just so everyone's clear. But you've got all these contradictions. I mean, you've got in California this week, you've got people who were protesting the state capitol because of vaccinations in schools. Now, kids are being required to get vaccinated, but teachers aren't. You've got the governor who's gone out there and said, everyone's got to get vaccinated. In Los Angeles, you've got to show proof of vaccination to go into a restaurant, to go into movie theaters, to go into the gym. But yet you've got the same, you know, Newsom administration that was out there in court saying, well, prison guards, they don't need to get vaccinated. We want to do an exemption for them. And his administration was out there in court. Now, mind you, as we've talked before, the prison guards did provide $1.7 million
Mm-hmm.
to help them fight the recall. But you can't go out there and promote vaccinations for everyone and say, but I'm going to exclude this group and this group and this group for really no logical sense. If kids are supposed to get vaccinated and are required to get vaccinated, well, what about the teachers? Why not them?
Right. Well,
Um,
and here's what you've just done. You've taken this full circle to the question of what is fair, and that's what people are responding to. I think the question of what's fair. Does everybody get a vaccine, or do you get an exemption for vaccine if there's a religious exemption, or you gave a political contribution of X amount of dollars, or you belong to a union that supports a certain political party or a certain political person? Those are the kind of, is it fair that they're able to find $450,000 for an illegal that came to this country willingly, knowingly, and got separated from their family, and yet they don't have enough money to pay for our men and women, for their families in military service? One of the other things I read this week is, I think it's some ridiculous number, like 18 or 16% of American military families are on food stamps
yeah.
because we don't pay them enough. That's unconscionable when you have this. There's no fairness or equity, to use the liberal word. They love using the word equity. And I'd love to see Kamala try and address this thing, because she loves using the word equity whenever she's allowed to speak. Where is the equity in any of this? And to your point, you can't have a logical argument or discussion about vaccinations when someone gets a free pass because of who they know, what they belong to, what organization they belong to. It's either a health issue or not. When you allow what they're doing, which is forcing the kids to get vaccines and the teachers not to, that becomes a political issue, because that union contributed so much money to the governor's campaign. That fairness, is it fair on the gas prices? I mean, the most unfair it is, I'm not going to be like class shaming here, but if you're driving around in an $80,000 Tesla, or not a Tesla, that's a bad example because you got to plug it in. But if you're
A
driving around
Mercedes, yeah.
a Mercedes or something like that, the extra 75 buck for the gallon of gas might not make that much difference. But you know what? If you're a working class guy or woman, and you work in two jobs, and you're driving the old Toyota Corolla, that's going to make a huge difference to you. Again, it's the fairness issue that exists in this state that I think people need to rise up and do something about, and say, on the vaccine part, I love, because Fauci, I don't know if you saw this, Fauci is like giving advice now on how to have a safe family Thanksgiving. And, I'm listening to him do that, and then I'm watching the bill signing ceremony yesterday, big win for Biden. Everybody standing shoulder to shoulder. There was I think someone said 60 or 66 people there for the bill signing. It was so big. And I didn't see one of them standing there wearing a mask. And all I could think to myself was, if that was Trump, there, you would have seen the headlines in the New York Times: Trump holds super spreader event. Um, you know, it was the same thing. What they were spreading this time, I don't know, but it was that kind of difference in that fairness. What's right for one should be right for all, and that's what we don't have in California.
And they kind of just add one other little factoid there on this whole fairness thing. California is also, as you talked about the military. I know you talked about the death benefits they get, and at the same time how you got all these military families that are on that need to get food stamps, aren't able to get food stamps, but are living in poverty. California is also one of the only few states that also taxes their retirement
Mm-hmm.
for military retirement. There's a lot of other most states in the union don't touch their retirement, don't tax their retirement, but California is, and so
Well,
that's
we
one of
need
the
the
things.
money. Just ask Gavin. That's why he's talking about how we're going to have a huge surplus. You know,
Well,
let's
that may be one of the things that we try working with the legislator, or put it up as a proposal to not tax their income, that or their retirement. That may be something we can end up working on it.
be great.
As we go into this January's right around the corner, where they start introducing no legislation. And I'm
Duck and
sure I'm
cover.
sure there's got to be a legislator or two that are willing to kind of take up this cause.
So the legislature's coming back in session.
Well, they'll be coming back in session in January. They've been off since, I want to say, September, and they'll be coming up in January. But come January, there'll be about maybe 3,000 new proposals for laws. For those laws that didn't get passed this last year, they'll be carried over because they run in a 2-year cycle. So, they end in September. Those pieces of legislation didn't get passed will get carried over for next year, and then you'll be getting a new I don't know, avalanche of new bills that get proposed. And they basically, by the end of this year, in 2022, which is going to be right around October, those bills that don't get passed will end up dying. And so they get rejected, they get approved and sent over to the governor, or those that don't get it out of committee, they automatically die because it's the end of the 2-year cycle. And
Right.
so,
Duck and cover. The legislature's coming back.
yes, they are coming back. And
3,000 bills later, what are the odds that life is going to be better?
well, and even with the surplus, as we talked about, how it all depends on how that money is used. And if it's used for most social services, and like I said, strong safety net. But at the end of the day, it's just, let's get people into jobs, and let's get people trained. Let's get let's get let's improve our education system. And I know we've talked about how much money already goes in there, but things have got to get better. I mean, I get tired of watching or seeing this polling that comes out where families believe that their kids are going to be better off living in some other state or living somewhere else. I mean, California has always been a place of opportunity, has always been, this great place where, kind of like the idea of New York. You can be anyone, you can be anything. And if New York has a thing, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
Well, California was always that dream place to go to. And
Mm-hmm.
it's sad to see that it's become a very difficult place for so many Californians just to survive.
Right. Just to survive.
Yep.
That's exactly right. Well, maybe our next show, as we get closer to Thanksgiving, we'll do something to give thanks for.
And that's a great idea.
Do something positive.
Yep. So we will let's end it here, and let's move on with our day. But
And
nonetheless,
let's hope that the president pardons the 2 turkeys that are currently on the screen, Hector and Mike.
there you go.
I don't think somehow I don't think he would.
Yeah, I don't think you would either.
He'd probably have the chef in the White House coming out with the cleaver to chase us across the White House lawn.
That is true. That is so true. All right, Mike. Well, it's
Thanks.
great catching up with you again. And until the next time.
Look forward to it. Thanks, everybody.